Nearly 500 years ago, within the cold walls of the English palace, a marriage was arranged in exchange for power and political security. Yet, instead of securing a strong alliance, it became one of the most shocking tragedies of the Tudor dynasty. At the center of this story stands Anne of Cleves, the woman remembered by posterity with the bitter title, the rejected wife of King Henry VIII. From the very first meeting, the most powerful monarch in Europe at the time expressed his disappointment regarding Anne as a mistake he was forced to endure. But was it truly just because she was not beautiful enough, as the rumors claimed, or was there another secret that made Henry so repulsed? Anne's story is not merely about appearance. It begins with the cold calculations of politics, where marriage was not built on love but on interests, blood, and power. In that vortex, Anne was swept in, becoming a pawn on the stormy European chessboard. Yet instead of disappearing like many women of her time, Anne left an indelible mark, not only because of her short-lived marriage, but also because of the way she survived in a ruthless world where most of Henry's wives paid with their very lives. Welcome back to Channel History, where we turn the forgotten pages of the past and uncover the truth behind stories that may seem all too familiar. Join me on a journey that is both intriguing and haunting to understand why Anne of Cleves, once a princess from a distant land, became the strangest figure among Henry VIII's wives. Anne of Cleves did not come from an ordinary background. She was born into a powerful family, her father being the Duke of Cleves, a man renowned for his toughness, standing firmly against both the Pope and other Catholic monarchs. In the context of 16th century Europe, which was deeply divided by religion, Anne grew up as a potential pawn in the game of power. It was a time when daughters were not taught to dream of love, but to prepare themselves to become instruments of politics. And for Anne, that moment came sooner than she expected. In England, King Henry VIII had broken away from the Catholic Church after divorcing Catherine of Aragon. He needed new allies, a bond with powerful Protestant lords to protect his throne, and in that calculation, his eyes turned to Anne. But Henry could not rely on introductions alone. He needed to see, to feel, before making his decision. A famous court painter, Hans Holbein, was sent all the way to Cleves to paint portraits of Anne and her younger sister Amalia. The king gave clear instructions: no flattery, no beautifying beyond reality. For him, a portrait would serve as the equivalent of a meeting. However, under German customs, women had to keep their faces covered very modestly. Holbein had to rely on patience and persuasion to finally see the true faces of the sisters. When the portrait returned, Henry looked at it and chose Anne. That decision did not stem from affection, but from political advantage. Anne was the eldest daughter with greater inheritance rights. He believed this was a wise choice, but history would show that it was from this very decision that a tragedy began. The first day Henry met Anne should have been the moment that marked the beginning of a new alliance, but instead, it became a tragic turning point. When Anne's bridal procession stopped at Rochester, Henry staged one of the romantic games he so enjoyed, disguising himself as a commoner to suddenly appear for his future bride. He expected a look of recognition, a joyful smile, or at least a spark of emotion at seeing her destined man. But reality played out in the opposite way. Anne, who had grown up in a strict environment where women were required to maintain decorum and distance, had no idea about this theatrical act. When she saw a strange man approaching, she did not sense romance, only discomfort and caution. Some accounts even suggest that she turned away, deliberately avoiding his gaze. To Henry, this was nothing less than a slap to his pride. From that very moment, everything changed in the king's eyes. He no longer saw Anne as a bride, but as an insult. When the official meeting took place afterward, words of criticism began to surface. She is not at all as beautiful as she was praised to be. From one small incident, the first impression turned into a verdict for the entire marriage. Henry carried that disappointment into the wedding ceremony, and it would soon become the perfect excuse for him to reject Anne later on. What seemed like a harmless encounter had quietly planted the seeds for one of the most disastrous marriages in the history of the English monarchy. The wedding between Henry and Anne took place in early 1540 in a splendid and solemn atmosphere, but behind the lively music and shimmering candlelight, the coldness in the king's eyes was evident. He entered the ceremony like a man forced into his own decision. The wedding night, which should have been the moment to unite the newlyweds, instead turned into a disaster. Henry complained that he felt no attraction toward Anne, even going so far as to invent the cruel claim that she had an unpleasant odor, words so harsh that history still remembers them today. For Henry, the lack of harmony in the bedchamber was nothing less than a death sentence for the marriage. Yet ironically, he did not dare admit his own impotence. To preserve his honor, Henry declared that the marriage could not continue because Anne had once been betrothed as a child. Within just 6 months, from the moment she entered the chapel to the time she left, Anne had become the shortest-lived wife on the king's list. That marriage was not only a failure between two people, but also a crack in Henry's political ambitions. He wanted a queen who was both beautiful and able to secure a strong alliance. But in the end, he gained only humiliation and mockery. For Anne, those months were a harsh trial, but they also opened a door few could have expected. She escaped life with Henry while preserving both her honor and her life, something most of his other wives could not achieve. After the marriage collapsed, many thought Anne's fate would be the same as other women who had passed through Henry's life, humiliated, imprisoned, or even executed. But something unexpected happened. Instead of lashing out in anger, Henry treated Anne in an unusual way. He granted her mansions, estates, a large annual income, and a special title, the king's beloved sister. This position elevated Anne to a rank just below the queen and princesses, making her one of the most powerful women in England without having to bear the burdens of the throne. Anne also showed her strength and wisdom. She did not complain or rebel, but chose to remain gracious, maintaining good relations with Henry and the court. She often sent gifts to the king, and especially to his children. Edward, Mary, and Elizabeth all respected her, treating her as true family. It was this diplomacy that allowed Anne to live safely within a palace full of intrigue, where a single misstep could cost one's life. Though free from marriage, Anne was not spared from rumors. Some claimed she was pregnant, possibly with Henry's child. Others suggested she hoped to remarry him after Catherine Howard was executed. But in the end, Henry chose Catherine Parr. Even so, Anne managed to retain her position, her respect, and above all, her life. Among Henry's wives, she was the one who turned a bitter failure into the beginning of a free and peaceful life. Anne was not distinguished in music, painting, or the refined pleasures that Henry so deeply adored. Nor was she the type of dazzling woman who could captivate a crowd the moment she entered a room. But Anne possessed a far more enduring and subtle weapon: intelligence and adaptability. Soon after arriving in England, she quickly learned the language to communicate, integrate, and win favor. She understood well that to live peacefully in a court full of traps, the key was not to compete for the king's love, but to secure the trust and affection of those who truly held the future, Henry's children. For many years, Anne became a quiet companion to Edward, Mary, and Elizabeth. She offered gifts, showed care, and in return received respect from those who would go on to shape England. This not only gave Anne a comfortable life, but also ensured that she was never cast aside or forgotten. While many other queens lived in fear, Anne enjoyed her middle years in peace. In 1557, she died at the age of 41, likely from cancer. The court granted her a special honor: burial at Westminster Abbey, the resting place of England's kings and queens. On her tomb, the inscription still reads, "Queen of England," a testament that, despite her short marriage, Anne forever remained part of royal history. And more importantly, she stood as living proof that sometimes survival itself is the greatest victory. Anne of Cleves entered history with a name that sounds bitter: the rejected wife. But if we look deeper, her story is not merely one of humiliation at being scorned for her appearance by a king, but a testament to the strength of patience, wisdom, and the will to survive. While many other women were swept into the whirlpool of power and paid with their lives, Anne chose a different path. She did not oppose Henry, nor did she try to compete, but skillfully accepted her fate, preserving her freedom and dignity. That choice made her one of the rare wives of Henry who lived out her life in full. Anne's story compels us to ask, what does it truly mean to be a queen? Must it be power, crowns, and thrones? Or is it the ability to preserve one's peace amidst the storm while still leaving a lasting impression on future generations? Anne proved that sometimes victory does not lie in being loved or not, but in being able to rise above rejection and turn it into an opportunity to live a freer, happier life. Anne's ending was not just the conclusion of a failed marriage, but the opening of a lesson that remains valuable even today. When faced with pain and injustice, you may fall, but you can also choose to stand firm and find your own path. And in the violent history of Henry VIII, Anne of Cleves shines as vivid proof that survival, at times, is the most beautiful form of triumph. The life of Anne of Cleves is a striking paradoxy. She entered her marriage with Henry VIII as a pawn in the political chessboard, only to become the victim of scorn and rejection. 6 months as queen seemed like the end of a young woman's life, but from that very failure, Anne carved out another path. She did not choose confrontation, nor did she harbor resentment. Instead, she quietly adapted, lived with kindness, and skillfully maintained her relationship with Henry and his children. Because of this, Anne enjoyed a peaceful, wealthy, and respected life, and was even laid to rest at Westminster Abbey, an honor not all of Henry's wives received. Her story is a reminder that in life, we cannot always control what happens to us, but we can always decide how we respond. It was her tact, patience, and ability to turn failure into opportunity that ensured Anne is remembered not as a victim, but as a silent victor. The lesson is this: when faced with rejection, failure, or injustice, instead of falling into resentment, learn to remain calm, preserve your self-worth, and find another path forward. In work, in love, or in the challenges of modern life, wisdom and patience can help you transform failure into an opportunity for a happier life. What do you think? Is survival and keeping peace a greater victory than power itself? Share your thoughts in the comments so everyone can discuss together. And don't forget to subscribe to Channel History to support us in bringing you more fascinating and meaningful stories from the past.